Pejman Mirza-Babaei as our keynote speaker. The title of his talk is Data-Driven Gameplay Experience Balancing. Pejman is an Associate Professor of User Experience Research at Ontario Tech University. His research is focused on the design and evaluation of user experience in interactive entertainment systems. He has published more than 50 peer-reviewed articles and frequently speaks at academic conferences and industry events. He is a co-editor of Games User Research Book, a compendium of insights from over 40 experts on UX research in games. Pejman has also worked on pre- and post-release evaluation of more than 25 commercial games. He serves as the UX Research Director at Execution Labs in Montreal, Canada, from 2015 to 2017, and was a game user researcher at Vertical Slice Player Research UK from 2009 to 2013. Pejman, welcome to the Brazilian Symposium on Human Factors in Computer Systems. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I know firsthand how difficult it must have been to organize such a big conference during the pandemic. So I really appreciate all of your effort to run this conference, and it's definitely my pleasure to be here and talking today. And given the current situation, I know that we are all connecting from different locations in the world. So I thought to start by kind of sharing where I am currently located. My university, Ontario Tech, it's around 50 kilometers east of Toronto in Canada. Try to kind of indicate that in this map here. And I also wanted to start my presentation by basically acknowledging the land and people of the Mississauga of Scugog Island First Nation, which is covered under the Williams Treaties. Moving on, I also wanted to basically highlight that it has been an honor to do this presentation, and over the last couple of years I have worked with many talented Brazilian researchers and students, and they have made a significant contribution to my lab and to my research. The most recent one is this work by Fred, which was published at CHI 2019 and was a collaboration between our university and his university back home. So when I was asked to deliver this keynote, I immediately accepted because I thought this might be a small token of appreciation, kind of giving back to the amazing HCI community that you guys have in Brazil. So again, as I said, it's my pleasure to be here and giving this presentation. I'm gonna start quickly by kind of highlighting some of my background. So I did my PhD at the University of Sussex in the UK. At the same time, I was working at a startup company called Vertical Slice, which later changed its name to Player Research. And what we were doing, we were basically, we provide user experience research services to the game industry. So my PhD was very much applied in focus. So most of the studies that I conducted during my PhD focused on commercial games. And the couple of games I have there as an example, such as a Split Second or Crisis 2, those are the games that I basically worked on during my PhD. In 2013, almost as I was completing my PhD, I got an offer to join Ontario Tech University or University of Ontario. So basically, we moved to Canada, and I continued that involvement and that research, focusing on game developers, particularly during the years that I worked closely with execution labs, focusing on helping indie studios to create their games. And there were a couple of projects at the time that we worked on. Perhaps one of the most famous one is two PewDiePie games that we worked on. And then other projects that I really liked was a game called Claws. And this was also developed by developers in South America. That was a really interesting project. Anyway, in my presentation today, as the name suggests, I'm going to focus on talking about how we use human-computer interaction or user experience research methods on studying player experience. However, as you will see, my focus is on studying those experiences with the goal to help developer create better games, let's say. So it has a very, what we refer to as a formative kind of evaluation in mind. So the focus is on improving particular projects. And those projects are often games that are under development. I guess on the cool side is, since games are such a complex medium, if we are able to adjust our method and find out new ways of evaluating those experiences, those methods and those approaches would be easily applicable to other domains. So once we kind of find a nice way to evaluate those complex experience, we can apply similar method to, let's say, evaluating websites or apps or other, let's say, form of interactive media. So we often, when we think about user evaluation, of course, there are various methods or user research methods that are available to us, from methods such as observation to running surveys or questionnaires to interviewing participants or using a physiological measure. And the key to running these evaluations, as you know, is to select appropriate method for the type of questions that we are trying to answer throughout those evaluations. And we often hear terms such as mixed methods, where we combine a couple of these methods together in order to have a better understanding of users or players in our case and their experiences. We also know each of these methods have their own limitations. And I have my next slide. I have here showing a couple of graphs just to highlight the limitation of self-reporting methods. So where we ask players to talk about or report back on their experiences. This is a small kind of a study that I was doing many years ago. And I provided players with a blank, basically paper blank sheet. And I asked them to draw a graph that represents their experience after playing a game for half an hour. And these are two examples of those. And you see half an hour of gameplay experience has been reported in a very basic graph, and it doesn't tell us much stuff. So the one on the top, kind of the player said, at the beginning, he thought he has a good experience or he's enjoying the game. At some point in the middle, he realized he's gonna win. So the challenge kind of disappeared. And then after that, he didn't really have fun with the game. The one on the bottom, that's a slightly more detailed one, that indicate kind of 3 events in the game that the player could recall or remember as something significant that happened. Although these methods or this approach can show us some indication of that experience. For example, in both cases, the players are identifying key points or key events that they could remember after the gameplay. However, the level of details that it provides is not sufficient enough for us to be able to improve the game, so act on these findings. And one of the approaches that I started using as part of my PhD was to combine physiological measures, including galvanic skin response and eye tracking, in that mixed method that we are using for evaluation. So I'm gonna play a small video here, and it just shows how these different data or data streams are linked together for that evaluation. So obviously you see the gameplay video, we see the participants' sitting position, we see which button on the controller he's pressing, and then we also have the GSR recording, and the green dot there, if you can see that in the middle of the screen, that's his where he's looking. So the kind of data feed from the eye tracker. And as I play this video, you would see how where he's looking changes based on different things that happen on the screen, and how his body, or GSR in that case, is reacting to those events. So I'm gonna play this for a few seconds. You see, like when he gets a feedback, he's reading that, he's paying attention to collecting more drift points. So he constantly checks that. And then as soon as he has enough points, he can use that points to modify the environment, which is that game loop that the game is offering. So basically driving, collecting point, making like big explosions, as you see just happen. And you see the reaction in the physiological data. The challenge here was, again, now we are moving from that limited data, limited details, to too much data. So how do we kind of use this to be able to find meaningful information for developers to act on it, to change their game? And one of the first work that I did in this space was a paper that we published at DIGRA conference. And in there, we proposed an approach to use physiological measure, or GSR in particular, to identify events that causes bigger change in players' response, and use those events to structure our post-session interview. So we are basically, again, going back to that mixed method. We want to interview players, but we wanted to have more structure based on the events that matter the most on their experience. And we identify those events by looking at the change in their physiological measure. And in that paper, we talked about what type of issues or events in the game we could identify based on this approach. However, one of the advantages of using physiological measure that I realized as I was working with developer was that it was a very good approach to convince developer of an existence of an issue. So working with developer, one of the bigger challenges is that as a researcher, you may find some issues with the game, but you still need to communicate those issues to the developer and make sure that they believe in you and they're convinced that those usability issues exist, so they could fix it. And that's one of the hardest part of a user researcher jobs. And as I was working with developers, basically looking at these different physiological measures, I realized that it's a nice way of communicating the existence of issues. When they see how frustrated a user gets because of a small usability issue in their game, it provides them with the motivation to fix that issue. So I thought we may be able to use physiological measure not only to help us identify usability or user experience issue, but to communicate those issues to a stakeholder, to developer. And that's the kind of approach that we proposed, and that was a paper at CHI 2013, where we called it biometric storyboard. So we basically thought we can create this graph of player experience based on their physiological measure, and then indicate different issues that player has experienced. So as you see in these images, there are like red and green dots, kind of emphasizing positive or negative points in the experience, and then we try to map that on a graph that was drawn based on participants or user GSR. This approach worked quite well when we were using it with 6 players or 9 players, so in a small usability type of a study setup. But when we added one of the issues we had, we heard back from the developers that in order for them to be convinced of an issue, they want to see more proof, more data. So we started thinking of what are the other ways that we could communicate this and make it more kind of automatic in terms of a recording and visualization. So a year later, 2014, we basically came up with this approach where we called basically, we called it unified visualization of player data, because we combined a couple of these data sources together. So if you look at these pictures, let's say the one on the top, you see that it shows one complete level of Mario game. The line itself, each of them shows a path or movement of one particular player. So you could kind of see where they went. And then we color coded the line based on their each player's GSR data. So their level of arousal, which is basically linked to excitement or frustration. And then once we created these visualizations, we saw there are a couple of interesting points in them. For example, in the middle picture, you see that there is a relatively safe area where there are not many enemies. There is not many gaps, so not much chance for players falling or encountering a difficult enemy. And you saw that collectively, the players experience a lower level of arousal. A little bit further, you see that there are 2 gaps and there is a slightly tougher enemy in there. And you see that players have experienced higher level of arousal. Or in the picture in the bottom, that's another interesting one, that you see that there were a big jump kind of towards the end. And from the movement data, we see none of the players failed this jump. So they all were able to do the jump or complete that. But at the same time, they experienced higher level of arousal, perhaps because they perceived that this might be a difficult jump to make, or they knew that they are getting close to the end of the level and they were more excited. The key point here is that we are not trying to tell developer here in this via this visualization on what issues they have with their game, but we are trying to communicate how players felt or experienced their game. And if that's not something that they wanted the player to feel, then that means they may need to change something in the game. So let's say if the developers didn't want the player to have a higher level of arousal, then they probably need to fix something in those moments where the players felt. In the middle picture, you see they had some collectibles on that upper platform, but only one player went there. So if they meant that if they wanted more players to use those coins, then they should have probably modified their design to make that platform a little bit more visible. So again, this work was one of the, I guess, first initial work that combined these different data sets together and proposed it in one visualization. But as you can also see, here we only had, I think, 6 players or 9 players, and it's already quite cluttered. So when we work with developers and we try to show this visualization to them, one of the key questions that they came back was, there are too much information. We cannot decide where should we put more attention. And that basically motivated our current work, that we are basically looking at aggregation and non-aggregated data. So, and this is a paper that we just published at CHI 2019. I'm saying just because that's basically the last conference I attended before the pandemic, so it's still in my mind. It sounds like a really fresh experience. But in this work, you see that we are prototyping different techniques for aggregating these different data sets. So we are looking at using heat map as well as the player's movement, and then we are trying to play around with the heat map by using different density, for example, to communicate different type of data. So, and this is something that we are still continuing to research, and it's one of our active projects. At the same time, we thought this work on looking at aggregating or non-aggregating data could have applications in other genres, at least, or other platforms. So we have started another project where we are looking at body movement in VR space. So here we are interested to see how much hand movement or leg movement or head movements players are performing during different experience. And the fundamental part of the work is, again, on the same basis. So collecting multimodal data and coming up with ways to visualize that data. The other topic that I want to focus a little bit is how we can make this research, or what sounds like quite a complex research, looking at different data point, different visualization technique, more accessible to let's say a small or medium-sized companies like indie developers. And I have some statistic. This is based on the Canadian game industry, but I assume it can be extended to other countries as well. So in Canada, we know that majority of the studios here are a small or medium size. So I think it's close to 90-something% of studios are fit under that definition. So probably less than 100 employees. The other things that we know is the game industry is actively contributing more and more to the country's GDP. So the graph that I have, the blue one in the back, so you see from 2013 to 2017, we see this increase, and the same trend has continued to this day. On the other side, the big table that I have in the middle shows that although we are adding more money to the GDP, but the spending is reducing. So across all different platforms, developers are now spending or putting less resources and still producing high quality game and making money out of that. So one thing, or the way I try to reflect on it, is that given the advances in technologies, in tools that we are using these days, a job, a task, a game development task that used to take a week to complete, now it's probably completed within days. That basically means the development needs less resources, but is still able to produce higher quality game. And this way of thinking obviously was motivated by my role at Execution Lab, where I was working with around 20 small studios. So based on those engagement, a new kind of research direction in my program, where how do we make these complex user research techniques more accessible and available to smaller companies. And that basically, again, achievable by the same principle, to look at the mixed methods as we talked earlier. So again, finding a new combination of methods that we could use to make our processes faster, easier, or cheaper, so that it could be beneficial to smaller companies. And one of the work that we did in that area was to combine metrics or data that we could collect from the game and this is done by basically adding some codes to the game, so it could record certain data. So for example, in the graph that I'm showing, the top one is recording the time each player spend in each level. A relatively easy metric to collect. You just need to add to your code start when the player starts a level and when they end the level, and the time stamp. So that's basically look at the time that each player spends in each level. And then in addition to their positions, which is another relatively easy metric to collect, where we are basically recording players' position in the level. And now when we combine the two together, this is where the exciting part is. So let's say from the top graph, we see that our level 5, it's where the players are spending a lot of time, and the developer tells us that, yes, this is more time than what we designed for. So there is something happening in this level. If we didn't have any of these metrics, to find an issue, you would probably need to sit and observe the whole gameplay and watch everything, which is time consuming and expensive. But now when we have this data, we know that other level 1, 2, 3, and 4 are okay, and level 5 is an issue. So rather than watching everything in those previous level, we just focus on the level that has the issue, that created the experience that doesn't match what the developer wants. Again, what we could do, we could focus even a little bit more, because we have the player's movement data, and we can create a heat map on where the player got stuck in that level. So as you see in the graph in the middle, this is reflecting on our player 3, it seems that the player stuck somewhere there. There were a puzzle or something, and they did lots of jumps so that they couldn't get through, and that's what maybe contribute to that spending more time as expected. So rather than watching the whole thing, observing the whole session, now we basically focused our investigation into a particular level and a particular event in that level that seems to have caused some issues. So again, highlighting the way that we could use these mixed methods and the data that we collect to find a way to pinpoint an issue and act on that. Another projects that we did is a Unity plugin that we built to be able to collect and visualize some of these data easier. So I'm gonna play another video, and the key in the video is just a bit of a demo of how this tool would look like, basically. So
researchers are developing a set of techniques and tools to measure and study players' behavior to provide information for game developers in order to optimize the player experience of their games. One major challenge is the sheer quantity of data that needs to be analyzed and understood. This cannot be done.
So as you could see here, we have this Unity tool that collects the data and visualizes it on the editor that developers would use to modify that. So the idea is, as developers working in Unity to adjust their level design, they could see all these, let's say, playtesting data at the same time, and that could help them to decide what part of the level they want to modify. And moving on, there is then another challenge that we are now facing, and I think the current pandemic might be an interesting case study for this, where collecting data from real player is difficult. Like, you need to bring them into the lab, you need to get them to play the game, and this could be really time consuming and expensive. So in one of our current projects, we decided that we would train AI agents that they could basically play the game instead of human players and generate the data that we need to be able to evaluate our game. Of course, we are not basically suggesting that these AI-driven players would completely replace human players, but what they could help is provide this source of simulated data so that the developer can run those tests more frequently and adjust their design before they bring in real players into the lab. The other cool feature here when we are working with this AI-based player is that we could program each player to perform certain behavior. For example, we could program them to try to go and complete the level as soon as possible. For example, that P42, the one on the bottom left, you see the player went into the finish point as soon as possible. However, the one on the bottom right, we programmed the players to avoid the enemies and go and explore the level. So basically, by programming different player style, we could create those simulated data based on a different playing style or different player behavior. And those data could then be used to adjust our level design before we bring in real players to play the game for us. I wanted to basically conclude my presentation by highlighting another issue that we've been facing a lot when we are working with developer, and that, unlike many other, let's say, area that contributes to game development, doing user experience research, it's sometimes hard to justify what sort of impact we had on the game in terms of the success, in terms of the revenue, in terms of the feedback or comments that players made. So one of our, again, most recent project was to look at if we can find a way to justify or to at least show some evidences that conducting user experience research have contributed to having a better product at the end. The reason I wanted to highlight this study is I see it as a way that kind of brings everything together as kind of the concluding, I guess, part of the presentation, and it also kind of benefited from I think all the studies that we did, because we used the commercial projects that we worked on, we evaluated the reports that we submitted to developer, and then we collected data a few years after the game was released to see if the issues that we identified in the report were also mentioned by the reviews that the game has received. And then from there, we tried to make a link between what we could identify in the report and what the reviewers commented after the game was released, and using it as a way to justify the impact that user experience research can have on the game development. Again, with the same mindset that these are relatively extendable into other domains. And finally, obviously, I didn't do these works alone. There's a big team of students and collaborators that have participated in this project. So I just wanted to end my presentation by acknowledging them. And obviously, more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. So thanks again for having me, and feel free to ask any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Pejman. What's a really, really nice presentation. And as we can see, we already have some questions in Slido that I can see and I can put here for you. Let me see. Okay. In your opinion, is there a difference between playability and player experience? Which one do you usually evaluate in your tests?
So this is interesting because I think one of the issues we have in a field such as user research or games user research particularly, since it's a relatively new field, there is yet for those kind of common terminology to be established. So the way I see that many researchers or developers using these terms, and they, in most cases, they mean same thing. So they call it playability or user experience or playtesting or user research. And especially if you are talking to people in the game industry, they often mean the same thing. All they care about or want is to improve their game and have a better experience for players. In terms of academic setting or academic research, I have my kind of personal way of defining these terminologies, but there are many other researchers who sees them differently and define them in a different way. So for me, I think user research is a kind of a bigger umbrella term that can kind of capture all of these. Obviously, when we talk about usability and sometimes playability, I think we are basically targeting more of those usability goals and usability questions. When we are talking about user experience, we kind of move a layer higher, and then we focus on the game user experience goal and those measures. So kind of a slightly harder to evaluate, and obviously needing a different methodologies. So yeah, I think it's the main part of my answer is that the field is relatively new, and we yet to have a common terminologies to best describe what we mean by different things.
Thank you, Pejman. Another question. How do you evaluate the drawings? How can we combine and coverage the data? Did you ask them to explain specific moments of the experience?
So those drawings that I showed, I don't see them as a like an experiment. They were just playing with some ideas. We used some of them in some research later on in some of our project, but the main intention at the time that we were trying them was to see how what players would reflect immediately after they finished their gameplay. Purposefully, we didn't provide them much information on what we want them to draw. So we basically gave them a blank sheet and we said, draw how you felt. And we got so many different drawing. And so it wasn't an experiment to compare them, but it was just an idea of how different people reflect on their experience. Later on, I think 2 years ago, we did another study. And in that one, we wanted to compare what are the key things players could reflect on or remember immediately after the gameplay. And then we brought them back a week later, and then we asked them to redraw those graphs. And we just wanted to see the difference on what basically resonated with players over a longer period of time and what they highlighted immediately after finishing their gameplay. We haven't really published those because it's as I said, it's mostly like an idea to kind of experiment or look at the different ways players reflect. It's since it's very open-ended at the moment, it's very hard to compare or put them into like a acceptable academic publication. But I still think that it's a good example to highlight what players could immediately point out in the game experience that they had.
Have you evaluated UX in pervasive games? In your point of view, what aspects should impact the task of collecting user information during outdoor games?
So I think this is a little bit too specific for me to kind of answer fully, and I'm happy to have a longer discussion on that on Discord at some point. I joined the server. I think the key message here would be that each genre, each game, and each question we try to answer for that game needs a different mixture of those methods. So there is no one golden solution to say, if you are doing persuasive game, use this study or use this format. So like, it depends on what you want to evaluate in that game. For example, if you are looking at a game that have change, if you are trying to promote new way of doing something, like change in behavior, obviously that basically needs to be evaluated over a longer period of time. So a 1 hour session won't be enough. So you probably need to go and use methods that let you collect data over a month or over 2 months. So potentially then you would want to collect some metrics, as well as using some form of a kind of a diary or journal entry to go with that metric. If in your game you are focusing, again, it could be a persuasive game, but you're focusing to make sure that the players understand what they need to do, what are the basic features or basic mechanics, then yes, that's something that you can evaluate in the lab. You can bring like players and then ask them to start the game and let them play for 1 hour, just to make sure that the mechanics are clear to the player. But you are just focusing on that 1 hour experience, not the impact of that game. So, yeah.
We have a question from Felipe of UFAM. As you mentioned before, do you think that the biggest barrier today is to convince developers that what we identify is a real problem, and how do we do it?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Of course. As you mentioned before, do you think that the biggest barrier today is to convince developers that what we identify is a real problem, and how do we do it?
Yes, so I think they go hand in hand because if you are the best researcher, design the best study, collect everything awesome, like collect the best data and find out all the issues with the game. But if you are not able to communicate that to developer, and if developer don't change anything in their game, that basically means you haven't had any impact. So being able to convince them of an existence of an issue and the action they need to take to fix that issue, that's a really, really important part. On the other side, you could be the developer yourself, so you could be convinced to do something. But if you design a study that is biased and collect the data that doesn't really represent the question you had, then you could be misguided by the data that you have collected and change something in your game that wasn't an issue. So basically, yes, they are both very important, and they need to happen together to make sure that you have the impact that you want to have. There are ways on how to do that. Different companies use different techniques, but I guess again that's I can talk about it more, but I don't know if you have other questions that you want to ask, or you want me to
we
kind
have
of
some other questions, but
yeah.
If you can help us some guidelines, some tips to communicate, it's good.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to communicate with all the stakeholders, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are lots of articles online talking about reporting user research findings. So I think that if that's a focus, I think there are loads of, if you just do a search on that. I wrote an article on it as well, which is kind of my perspective, but I know that there are many of them available. I can send a couple of links into the Discord channel for this presentation.
Perfectly. Let me see. Eduardo Tanaka asks about the Unity plugin. It is available on Unity Access Story, Do you have some feedback from Unity community developers about the plugin?
Yeah, the plugins, when we created them in 2017, we wanted to put it on Unity Asset Store. At the time, there were I think disagreement on what this should be called. Like, is that the analytics tool or is that a user research tool? And I think it kind of conflicted a little bit with the Unity data collection tools that they also have. So it didn't make it on the asset store, but we made that available online, so it's free to download. Similarly, our PathOS framework, and that's another Unity plugin that we built. This is also available online for free. And we have companies who downloaded them. It's an open source code, so they basically took that and adjusted that for their need. And we have some comments on how they use it. But I think, yeah, I can share the links to them again, both on Discord. Like, we have for PathOS, I know that it's on GitHub. The Vixen tool, it's I think it's just a file living somewhere on the internet. I can find it and send it to on Discord again as well. Yeah.
Perfect. Last question, because of the time. Do you think artificial intelligence could also simulate real users' behavior in other systems, such as social media?
I mean, what I think doesn't really matter in this in this area, to be honest. I'm sure they are actually doing that already, and I wouldn't be surprised to hear if some of the interaction we see on social media or other platforms are not actual real user and are simulated users. Yeah, I think it's already happening, and I think even if it's not, it will happen at some point soon. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Pejman, we have here a lot of students, undergraduate students and graduate students as well. Do you have some tips or guidance for who wants to start in your area, research area, what points to see, what needs to be involved? Do you have some tips?
So as I said, I've been working with quite a few researchers from Brazil, and I've been super impressed by the quality of their work and also their kind of professional work ethics. So the work that I've seen from them, they're really good. I think we are moving towards the direction that those kind of access to information or access to tools are now everyone, regardless of where they are, they could have access to them. Many of conferences are actually now happening online, so that also provides an opportunity for students to join those conferences and benefit from that. I know a conference that I'm organizing, KaiPlay, starting next week, and we're gonna be online conference, obviously, like yours. And people can basically join in and watch the talks and participate in our activity. So I think that's an interesting steps to take. The fundamental part for me is to do a good work. Like, that's when I'm talking to students, when I'm recruiting them, the way I see them, and I always tell my students as well, that the time they have at university is where they could try to build the profile that they want to have. And so if you are working, you're taking HCI course and have an assignment, don't see it as just an assignment that you need to do to finish, but see it as a piece of work that you could use later on to start a collaboration or work with other faculty members. So kind of do your best on that. And when I'm recruiting students for my lab, that's one of the requirements. Like I ask them to send me a couple of couple of projects that they have, and based on that, I assess their work. The other thing, again, I've seen many students benefit from that is different kind of funding opportunity that allows the students to go and study in different universities or different countries. I think MyTax Global Link, that's I think something that I've seen many students from Brazil would use to go and study in different labs. Again, the focus here is that by doing so, or by getting different perspective, different experiences in different lab, that basically build your profile. So those opportunities are available to a student, and they could use it to make their profile stronger and to have those experiences from working with different supervisors or different labs, different universities. Again, the time they have at a school is the best time to build that portfolio that they want, and then basically use that for a career that they wish to have.
Once again, thank you, Pejman, for a great talk. You enrich our symposium. Tayana, if you'd like to talk a little bit with Pejman.
Just to thank you for the great talk, for all the inspiration. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
If you don't mind to answer more questions on Discord too, have lots of.
Yeah, I definitely gonna check, and I try to share the resources that I mentioned. I'm happy to kind of make a PDF of this slide and send them on Discord as well if anyone needs those links and those references to find more information. But again, everything I talked about, I tried to provide a little summary, but they've been explained in details in those in relevant papers, obviously. So yeah, and again, thanks for having me. I was really happy to get to do this.
Thank you again, and we hope to have you here in person in the next years too.
Yeah, me too. Cool. Yeah, good luck with the rest of your conference, and yeah, it was an honor to speak, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you.